Well, this war does clearly extend the borders of Ukraine. It's a repeated violation of the European security order by Russia, which started not only with this invasion to Ukraine and also not only with the war in eastern Ukraine in 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, but it started much earlier. So the signs of this, let's say, aggression or aggressive foreign policy with a kind of imperial background is dating back to the 2000s. So a first wake-up call should have been the war in Georgia in 2008. This was, well, from today's perspective, we see this as a first alert to see that Russia is not only willing to establish a certain imperial status, to re-establish it, but it is also willing to do so with force. The question that we have today is not only how the Ukrainian-Russian war can be ended, but the question is how we can deal with a Russia that obviously does not respect anymore the principles of the European security order, which are based on rules, particularly on the Paris Charter of 1990, which was the legal basis and also the moral basis of the European post-Cold War order. Or a retreat of Russian troops is very unlikely, as they are linked with certainly a failure and a breakdown of the Putin regime. So the military side is the one thing, the political side is the other thing. As I said before, this conflict is not only a military one about territories. It's going much deeper from a Russian perspective. Ukraine is part of Russian political and historical identity, with the Kievan Rus and with the history of Russia and the history of Ukraine. If you read into that, you will see that it is very, very linked, and the Ukrainian nation and state building process is very difficult. Ukraine did not find or did not achieve it or finalize its state building in the 20th century as many other Eastern European countries did, like Poland. And therefore it is also a historical political issue. You have to look into history a bit in order to understand the scope of this conflict. It's extremely hard to assess how this can be stopped, because this is deeply rooted into the Russian narrative of a Western threat, oppression, humiliation by the loss of its global power status after the breakdown of the Soviet Union. So for the EU, of course, a return to peace is top priority at the moment, but the more difficult task is to establish a long-term peace order in Europe. The Western countries, including NATO and EU, are getting closer in this situation of confrontation. I think Europe did, meanwhile, understand the scope of the situation. It's more than a bilateral conflict. This European security is at stake. What should be the priorities now is to overcome diversity in many key issues in Europe. For instance, to really build up autonomy, sovereignty, resilience in the fields of energy supply, in the fields or in a common sense of defending European values, the legal or the rule-based European order. This must be a common task for all European countries. Any divisions will only weaken Europe in that sense. And I think finally Europe also needs to strengthen its own defense capabilities. It is a bit surprising how so many years of cooperation and partnership between the EU and Russia, for instance, or Germany and Russia, which had very close ties in the last 3 decades, how all of the trust could be gone. No trust remained. At the moment, all bridges are cut, in fact. So the question how to get Russia back into the boat, or at least reach a state of mutual acceptance, if not cooperation, is a question that can only be reached by diplomatic means. And another important point is, I think that most of the what needs to happen is a domestic issue in Russia. So the people themselves have to think about their government, about their policy priorities, their relation to Europe, and how they want to, which kind of Russia they want. In that respect, Europe is just an observer. It has no power and no means to reach out to the Russian people and change the overall political situation in Russia.